Hello, friends. Welcome to this week's episode of Currently Workshopping, a show where we work through the perils and frizzle of being alive together. I'm your host, Cece, and on today's episode, I'm breaking the fourth wall and attempting to answer this question. Are you and I in a parasocial relationship? And if so, what type of parasocial relationship? This episode, I talk about how I came across this concept of parasocial relationship for the first time and what it is, evaluate whether parasocial relationships are good or bad, and give my own take about whether creators, including myself, owe you anything, drawing an analogy from corporate law, of course. Before we get started, I want to give a shout out to Roscoe Forever 18 and Callie for rating and leaving a review. I appreciate your taking the time to do that so much, and if you enjoy this episode, please consider the Holy Trinity yourself. Rate, review, and subscribe. And without further ado, one of the first things I did when I started thinking about launching a YouTube channel after my mild success on TikTok was ask friends for recommendations on channels they liked and content they liked. It was fascinating to me all of the different types of classic YouTube subjects that came up, particularly in lifestyle, what I eat in a day, get ready with me, intimate Q&A sessions. One of my friends recommended Best Dressed on here, or Ashley, and I immediately fell in love with her editing. It was really clear to me that she put a lot of thought into her videos, and even her normal daily routine vlogs, which I tend to find boring, captivated me because her storytelling and editing were so well done. I was like, what an interesting world and an interesting way to create. But of course, this was also about 9 months since she last posted a video. So when I searched for her videos, I got several video essays about whether she was problematic, what happened to her, and I can never resist a good "Where Are They Now" video. One of those commentary videos blamed Ashley's disappearance from YouTube on her audience and their parasocial relationship with Ashley, basically hypothesizing that it was Ashley's own strong parasocial relationship with her fans that caused her to stop creating on YouTube, because it was so strong that when they became disappointed in her, which is honestly inevitable because haven't we all been disappointed by a family member or friend at some point, that strong parasocial relationship flipped from extremely positive to extremely negative. It was the first time I had come across that term, parasocial relationship. What the heck was that? Psychologists define parasocial relationships as imagined one-sided connections with celebrities or media figures. Sometimes these parasocial relationships can be quite emotionally intense. Evanna Lynch, the actress who portrayed Luna Lovegood in the Harry Potter movies, had a fan who would write novel-length letters to her, only to then turn around and be furious with her for not replying. This isn't limited to actual celebrities like Lynch either. Zara McDonald and Michelle Andrews, co-hosts of a popular Australian podcast, also reported having fans flip the switch on them and send aggressive DMs or critical podcast comments if the pair didn't respond to them. And last year, I had my own parasocial moment. A viewer whom I dubbed Benjamin sent me a solicitation for a one-on-one phone call. I declined, letting him know that I don't have time for one-on-ones with everyone who reaches out, and redirected him to my website's FAQs and the form where he could submit a question that I would answer publicly. And he went off on me. I have to find it and read it because it was just wow. I have an extremely hard time believing your following, quote unquote, is that abundant. You have plenty of time for a 10-minute call. It costs you nothing, makes you nothing, but it makes sense. You are still young and had to fight hard for the positions you occupy currently. You will become more charitable and altruistic as you age and gain material success. Just remember, there is always time. Go tell Jeff Bezos, or even your senior partner for that matter, that you don't have time. Lastly, 9 out of 10 of the dolts hitting you up are just time-sucking tire kickers that have no potential. Thanks for your microaggressive civility. Farewell. I was shocked by this response, just really shocked. I made a TikTok about this response and wanted to really highlight how unprofessional and dumb a response like that was, but the reception to that video was quite shocking to me as well. Quite a number of people thought that I was entirely in the wrong, and that really threw me for a loop. And then the video got picked up by the New York Post and Daily Mail, and I'm not going to get into that here, but let's just say that news cycle was not a fun one to navigate. I'll go more into it all on my Patreon postscript this week, so head on over there if you want the tea on that whole saga. So the through line here is that someone thinks that they know you in some way because of what you put out about yourself online, and that knowing that knowledge indicates a relationship of sorts in their mind. This is where it gets confusing. On the one hand, it is normal, even compassionate and empathetic, to feel connection to someone you see on a screen. It's why we share media that we like with potential new friends. Yes, partially to have shared interests to talk about, but also because if we like some TV show or movie or video game, it indicates that we empathize with some of the themes of the medium, and the potential new friend might also empathize with some of the themes of the same show or movie or video game. Of course, there's always the possibility that we like the same medium for different reasons. Like maybe we both like Game of Thrones, but you like Arya Stark and I like Ramsay Bolton, and that says very different things about us. But still, when we don't know anything about someone, sharing opinions and interests about media is as good of a route as any to identifying any friendship potential. If you cried at the end of season 3 of Dairy Girls, then chances are we would get along, because I freaking cried at the end of Dairy Girls. I was completely lost in that story, that world, and felt completely attached to the very fictional characters in the show. So yeah, being able to identify and connect with someone on screen is frankly a pretty normal human ability, and I would honestly be a little concerned if someone didn't identify with anyone whom they saw on screen ever. Like, I'm not saying that you may have psychopathic traits if you watched Cyberpunk Edgerunners without shedding a tear, but I'm not saying that either. If it's normal and frankly quite human to connect with fictional characters on the other side of the screen, wouldn't it also be quite human to connect with a real person on the other side of the screen? Why, yes, I would think so. And parasocial relationships can even have positive impacts. Parasocial relationships have been shown to satisfy some of our affective, behavioral, and cognitive needs similar to traditional bidirectional relationships, and they also help us feel less lonely. In addition, a study published earlier this month in Scientific Reports found that parasocial relationships with a YouTuber with mental health issues help passively reduce prejudice with respect to those with mental health issues. So there is a healthy way to engage in parasocial relationships. But the part that starts making a parasocial relationship feel icky, at least to me, is when the audience starts demanding things from the creator. Not asking, but demanding. Like, it's one thing to make requests to the creator about what topics to address next or giving feedback, but it's a totally different thing to demand that they address something or respond to you, or else. That's just harassment? Put it this way, if I texted a friend repeatedly that way, saying that they have to respond to me or else, that would be borderline harassment. They should probably block me. I'm not of the camp that creators don't owe you anything, because I do think there is a relationship between a creator and their audience. Obviously, if there weren't a relationship, then the creator would be talking to no one, communicating to no one, showing something about themselves or their minds to no one. And creating obviously involves wanting to communicate something to the public, or else you could just make your own video or newsletter or podcast or whatever and keep it to yourself. But by posting it online, there's this urge to reach out to the world, this world that feels so large yet can feel so lonely at the same time, and hopefully have some people reach back in the form of likes or comments or just watch time. Like, that's a relationship. Maybe not a relationship in the way that you have with your childhood best friend or spouse, but it's still a relationship. The question is, though, what type of relationship and what do we owe each other in that particular relationship? I had this discussion with a friend who's a professor because we often talk about pedagogy and what's appropriate classroom behavior when we're standing behind the lectern instead of sitting in front of it. As an aside, it's still sometimes unbelievable to me that we both teach in some capacity, that students pay good money to sit and listen to us, because in my head, we're both still young, dumb, and broke, trying to get positive recommendation letters from our professors. Of course, we know that in order to be good instructors, we need to be available to our students when they're taking our course. It sucks to be taking a class and not be able to get a hold of the professor. We both know that, we've both been there. Trying to chase down an absent professor is pretty difficult. But, and this is the question that we were kicking about, what relationship do we have with former students? Should we have with former students? Is it equal to or lesser than the relationship with current students? Do we owe the same thing, whatever that thing is, to all former students or just the former students who excelled in our respective classes? And if we don't owe anything to former students, is it discriminatory to only selectively respond to those students who excelled in class? And if discriminatory, along what lines of discrimination? I think this is honestly how prickly and ill-defined a creator's relationship with their audience is. Sure, it's inappropriate for a fan to show up at a creator's home and icky for a follower to demand that the creator respond to their DM, but beyond those clear-cut cases, it's pretty unclear what is reasonable or unreasonable to expect from a creator or influencer or author whose success you have contributed to in part. I recently finished Cal Newport's book, Deep Work, which basically outlines why we shouldn't make our emails generally available to the public. Essentially, he argues that doing so interrupts with our ability to focus on doing deep work, which is highly focused work for as many hours as you can handle. Newport contends that making yourself available to your audience, even by giving them an easily accessible email address, interferes with the deep work necessary to do what you are doing in the first place, whether it's write articles or books, style yourself and take photos, or whatever. Newport references other prolific writers, Neil Stephenson and Michael Lewis to name a few, as being so well respected and prolific because they don't make themselves available to their audience. His point is if they were constantly distracted by incoming emails and audience requests or feedback, they wouldn't be able to sit down and do the thing that made them so great in the first place, craft compelling narratives. The aspect I hate about Newport's argument is that his examples are all unrelatable. Like, on some level, I get it. If I were Michael Lewis, and I wish I were, I'd be getting paid by publications regardless of whether I interacted with individual readers. But I'm not Michael Lewis, and for the creators and influencers with whom we develop parasocial relationships, they're also not Michael Lewis, which isn't to downplay the influence that online creators have, because some online creators certainly have viewerships that exceed even Michael Lewis, and the quality of their content, I'm always in awe of ContraPoints, for example, is just as good, if not better, than Lewis. No, the difference isn't clout or impact or quality. The difference is recognition by traditional media institutions. My favorite high school teacher had an aphorism that he would say to us: everything is about sex, except sex, which is about power. And I think that's core to the central inquiry here. Who gave you power? The tenor of receiving power from large entities with large amounts of power feels different from receiving power in a more grassroots style. And the expectation we have for those who receive traditional power versus grassroots power is different. For those who receive traditional power, they feel a bit more removed, and we don't feel as if we contributed significantly to their power. After all, I'm not in the casting room saying that we should cast Sydney Sweeney. I'm not a music producer advocating for the next American Idol. I'm not a creative industry or cultural gatekeeper. So I don't feel like I have any say in who receives traditional power. I might have an opinion, sure, but I don't really have a say because who am I? No one. For those who receive grassroots power, on the other hand, and I think anyone who generates any sort of following primarily through social media falls into this category, they feel more immediate. When I hit subscribe or follow, I am directly contributing just a little to that person's power. When a creator does something I don't like or disapprove of, I can unfollow, in the understanding that I am now taking away what little power I had to give them. We understand this, and thus we subconsciously feel partially responsible for a creator's success. And with partial responsibility comes a sense of ownership, right? In the workplace, one of the biggest complaints about junior associates was that they didn't take ownership, which is really just another way of saying they didn't take full responsibility over the project. And those two ideas, responsibility and ownership, are intertwined. When you are responsible for something, you do feel like you own it. This isn't necessarily good. We see this perversion of responsibility into ownership in very toxic ways. The prime example being parents feeling like they own their kids and their kids owe them something. Of course, love is also a component of that relationship, but so is ownership and the parents feeling that the child should do what the parent wants. The child is an extension of the parent. This is pretty prevalent in Chinese upbringing, I think. I, like a lot of Chinese immigrants my age, I'm sure, was raised primarily by my grandparents back in China when I was very young. I love my grandma to death, but one time someone complimented me to her, saying that I was accomplished or something like that. And my grandma responded by saying, "Thank you." That short response, "thank you," says so much, you know? I know it's not an abnormal response. It's very normal to hear parents say thank you when someone compliments how well their child turned out, but it's still so bizarre to me. Like, I don't doubt that it was a lot of responsibility and took a lot of effort and thought and dedication to raise a child, but thanking someone for complimenting your child will never not strike me as weird. It suggests this underlying sense of ownership because it's the same response we would give when someone like compliments our outfit or our car. Wouldn't the better response just be to agree and also compliment your child? But okay, clearly there is a tie-in somewhat between responsibility and ownership. And because social media power or clout comes from all of us, each of us giving someone some power, it's more likely for us to feel some sense of ownership over the creator or influencer as well. Probably not consciously, because when we say it out loud, it's really bizarre, but definitely subconsciously. And that subconscious sense of ownership, however small, means that the parasocial relationship is different than the parasocial relationship we have with wielders of traditional power. My parasocial relationship with Michael Lewis is very different from my parasocial relationship with Ashley of Best Dressed. She did feel more immediate, accessible, like I contributed to her fame and success. Not so with Michael Lewis, where I felt like I was just a spectator to his power thanks to traditional publications like Vanity Fair, The New Yorker, and the New York Times Magazine. I definitely didn't sit in those editors' rooms of those publications and say, hey, why don't we smash that follow button on Michael Lewis? There's that saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and I think that applies to grassroots power as well. Yes, we did contribute to someone's power, just a little, but when we act like we represent all of the grassroots power and start demanding things as if someone owed us all, when we are in fact just one, that's when it gets weird. So for Ashley of Best Dressed, right, as far as I could tell, she had two major issues that didn't sit right with some of her audience. She did a paid partnership with Amazon, which some of her audience felt was antithetical to her thrifting beginnings, and she posted a video of her COVID experience, which included a gathering with friends. And those are totally valid critiques that she could address. But there's a huge difference between asking that she address it, recognizing that you yourself are one of many in her grassroots power, and demanding that she address it. How dare she doesn't? Does she not respect her audience who gave her following in the first place? Like, that overstates one's own role and contribution in her fame and success, unless you somehow pulled a majority of her audience and got the okay to proxy communicate for them. Proxies. I worked in corporate law a bit, so my instinct tends to be to try and apply frameworks from corporate law to phenomenon I observe in the world. What struck me about this question of parasocial relationships with creators and what do they owe their audience seemed to me like, honestly, another version of the question of what do corporations owe their shareholders? We invest in all these corporations, right? These brands, Google, Tesla, GameStop, but at quite small volumes for most of us. Maybe I disapprove of the direction that Mark Zuckerberg is taking Meta and I sell off my 10 shares of Meta, okay? But that's like nothing. Zuck does not care about my selling 10 shares of Meta stock. It does not affect him and will not affect the direction in which he takes the company. This limitation on what individual shareholders can do when it comes to impacting a corporation is what leads to proxy voting. As of 2018, the US equity market showed that there was an unprecedented consolidation in ownership. Over 80% of market value of the S&P 500 was held by institutional investors and not individuals. So the individual investor who wants to make a corporation pay attention, say something, needs to align themselves with an institutional investor who holds enough ownership in the company to make the company pay attention. For creators whom we subscribe to and follow, they don't have consolidated interest in their online brand yet. That's really changing, and we are seeing repeat investors, so to speak, in influencer marketing. Amazon, for one, Revolve, many of the beauty companies. That's what's upsetting to some people about Best Dressed, I think. They saw her ascension from grassroots power to traditional power, saw their shares in her online brand diluted by the gigantic purchase order that Amazon put in for her online identity. There's even a name in corporate law for when something like that happens, the hostile takeover. And as the name suggests, hostile takeovers usually make older investors in the enterprise, well, hostile, both to the company and whoever did the takeover. And it's normal to feel that way. It's fine to feel that way. And it's fine to state your opinion. And you should state your opinion, honestly, because you are a shareholder, however small. And were you to somehow team up with enough other smaller shareholders, you could make a stronger statement. Maybe we'll see the evolution of proxy voting for creators. Who knows? But it is pretty weird for a 0.1% owner in an enterprise to make demands as if they were a controlling owner. It misunderstands the very real competing interests and dynamics at play, and often in a scary and hurtful manner to a human being, not a corporation, not a brand. For example, Dream's face review, I get that someone on the internet feels some ownership with respect to Dream SMP through following or subscribing or watching, and may have had opinions about Dream's face. But you know what? It honestly doesn't matter how much ownership you feel over Dream SMP. It is heinous to talk about someone's face and call them ugly like that. Like, it's just heinous. So the remaining question here is, are we in a parasocial relationship? Absolutely. This goes both ways. I feel like I have a relationship with people who comment, both the hate comments and the positive comments. And it is one-sided because I do not really know the person who is commenting. Instead, every time you comment, I construct an image of you in my head, an image that is, frankly, a one-sided relationship. So I don't think we need to deny that you and I are in a parasocial relationship because we are. We don't know each other, but we have in our head some idea of the other, incomplete, without important background, and really not enough to be making judgments about the other's moral character or ethics. This latter part is important because I think projecting morality or ethics onto someone else is such an easy setup to be let down, really betrayed by that person whom we don't even really know. And I project all the time, I really do. I project a ton of qualities on commenters, and off of what? A few lines, maybe a bad day? It's not fair of me really, and I want to be more cognizant of maintaining a healthy parasocial relationship with everyone, because there's no use denying it. And the only question that remains is how to establish the perspectives and boundaries that will make this parasocial relationship healthy instead of unhealthy. And that's all for this week. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode and are deriving value from our healthy parasocial relationship. In case you want to dive into the source materials yourself, I've linked all references in the show notes below, as well as my website, where you can find all of my socials and other projects. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd really appreciate your taking the time to rate, review, and subscribe, and I'll do a shout out on next week's episode. See you then.